I'll move on to the next section, which I believe is, which I would describe as what are some of the things that I would have liked to have heard when I was in school and I was thinking, or rather dreaming about being a concept artist, that would have helped me. First and foremost, if you're thinking about sort of working professionally for games, obviously in game art, the most critical thing is your portfolio. It is a complete illusion to think that you'll ever be hired in a meaningful place with just your school portfolio. So it is imperative that as you work through your courses, you should certainly give that your best shot, but you have to also work on other projects. Like, I'm at a point where I get to see so many portfolios from people, like as soon as I see a school portfolio, I dismiss it. I don't even look at the quality anymore. Like, I'm not interested. Like, this doesn't tell me anything about like what I'm looking at. So that is really important. Another thing to take into account there is that I believe it sort of what is an underlying, probably even more important fact is the fact that you shouldn't expect your education to hand you the tools to ultimately get to be where you want to be, because that's such a personal thing, right? Like, that's never going to happen. There's never going to be a point in your life where you're like, oh, you know what, like, because of teacher X, Y, and Z, I got to exactly the point where I wanted to be. That's such a personal thing. You have to sort of craft that trajectory for yourself, and thus it's really important to work on your own personal projects. This is important. You know, when you Google for like how to get into the games industry, like they'll say something similar to what I just said in the first slide. You know, your portfolio ultimately matters, and your piece of paper does not. But that's actually not entirely true. Certainly for like a junior art position, it is entirely possible, and for other levels of seniority as well, it's entirely possible to get hired without a school diploma. But at the same time, as you sort of progress in your career, you'll find that there are things that come with having a degree that you might not have thought of. Like, for example, my own immigration procedure into the United States would have never been possible had I not had that piece of paper. It is completely irrelevant what it is, or sort of you know, how relevant it ultimately was to what it is you're doing specifically. But things like that are very good reason to finish your school. Another reason, which I only found out when I started working in the US, school in Europe is practically free, right? Like I talk to guys that are in my team that have like basically debts related to their schools that are almost as high as my mortgage was in Europe, right? Like, we're talking of like over $200,000 in debt simply because they wanted to be in school. And if you think about that, as a European, right, where sort of the school systems are so much cheaper and often very comparable in quality, it is such a huge competitive advantage to you guys, basically, because ultimately, if you work in games, it is even if you're staying in the Netherlands, it is a very international industry. So what you'll find is that you're going to compete with certain people anyway, regardless of what it is you want to do specifically. And so you should certainly keep that in the back of your head. Another thing is, and this is sort of a more of a, you know, like an emotional state you want to be in ultimately. You want to get to a point where you are receptive to that window of opportunity that will eventually open for you. But rather than to just passively wait for it, it is very important to you know, market yourself very aggressively and to create the circumstances for yourself to make your own dreams come true, right? Like, it is very important that you turn that passion that you have for something into tangible action in order, like I said, to create the context for yourself to develop what it is you want to do, ultimately. And then this brings me to the last point, which kind of doubles up to what I just said about aggressively selling yourself, but it's also about the mindset. Like, I truthfully, like, when I was first hired, Ronnie, who is in the audience, can attest to this, sitting right over there, I actually applied as a level designer at my first company because I was convinced I could never be a concept artist, right? Like that was sort of way over my head, could never do that. Like the guys that I was looking at, Feng Zhu, for example, were so far ahead of me that I figured that's never going to work. But I was lucky enough to sort of end up in a company where there were no real dedicated concept artists, and so I figured, well, you know, if no one's going to do it, I'll at least give it a shot. And sort of that one thing led to another, and at some point I realized, you know what, like I'm actually already doing what it is I want to do. I'm just going to stop caring about the fact that I'm just pretending to be a concept artist and just adopt that mantle, right? Like, and it's really important. Like, you kind of have to think ahead a little bit and put yourself in a position that you ideally want to be in further down the line, not necessarily the one you're in at that point in time. You have to think about yourself in a way that describes you in an ideal future version of yourself. Anyway, I think I ran out of time, so that concludes my formal portion. That was it. Thank you very much.